In this video, I will show you my best tips on stopping your thread from tangling and achieve a neater stitching as a result. Hi, my name is Marie and this is the Caterpillar Cross Stitch channel. If you're new here, welcome. This channel is all about cross stitching and tutorials, so remember to hit like and subscribe to never miss a new tutorial from us. Remember to also follow us on our social media on Instagram and Facebook for even more stitchy inspiration. This video is all about my best tips to stop your thread from tangling and enjoy your stitching even more. So without further ado, let's get stitching. Tip number 1, stroke your thread before threading the needle. The thread naturally twists, so if you stroke it 3 to 4 times before threading the needle, it will make for a much smoother stitching. I just hold the loop if starting with a loop start and start stroking. Then thread the needle as usual. Tip number 2, quarter turn your needle every time you bring it above the fabric to counter the twisting of the thread. Just a little turn will do. We all naturally twist the needle a bit in one direction during stitching, so find out which direction is yours and then counter it with an ever so slight turn with each stitch. Tip number 3. Untangle the thread once in a while by letting it hang with the needle still on, while stroking it a couple of times to untwist it. Do this especially if you notice that the thread goes in a twist instead of staying loose during stitching. Stroke it 3 to 4 times and then continue stitching as normal. Tip number 4, railroad your stitches to make them look flatter and get rid of that twisted look of your top stitch. Railroading means that you divide the 2 threads with your needle when piercing the fabric and therefore dividing the 2 strands that don't get a chance to twist and lay really nicely and flat on the fabric. I personally only railroad the top stitch as my stitches are naturally quite flat thanks to all the previous tips. Tip number 5. When the thread starts misbehaving, twisting or knotting, unthread the needle and stroke each thread individually before threading the needle again and continuing stitching. This will counter the individual and often opposing twist of the threads when you're stitching with 2 strands of floss. Tip number 6 is that if your thread has lots of kinks in it after removing it from a bobbin or is generally very tangly, it's a good idea to run it through a wet sponge before you start stitching. It will be lightly damp, but it's okay to start stitching with it immediately. It smoothens out any creases and makes for a much more enjoyable stitching. The final tip, tip number 7, is that if your thread is still misbehaving even after you've tried all of the previous tips, I would recommend to take thread magic or beeswax and run your thread through it prior or even during stitching. Both work as thread conditioners and will most definitely help you to have a very manageable stitching thread. The one thing to be aware of is that your thread might darken in color when beeswax is used or potentially deteriorate slightly over time with thread magic. Some people swear by using thread conditioners and some would never use them on their stitching, so it is completely up to you what you're comfortable with. One thing I would say though is that in my experience, when thread magic is used, the thread glides more smoothly through the fabric, while beeswax could make it a bit more sticky, although it is a natural product unlike thread magic, so it's all about pros and cons and personal preference. So these are all my tips to prevent your thread from tangling and make your stitching more enjoyable. I hope it helped you, and I would love to know, do you have any tips that I haven't mentioned here? Please let me know in the comments below. I would love to know. If you love the project I was working on, you can get it and many others on our website www.caterpillarcrossstitch.com as a full kit or as a PDF. If you haven't yet signed up to our newsletter called VIP Stitch Club, make sure to head over to description below to get 8 free patterns and an amazing 10% off on your first order. Remember that you can also join almost 15,000 other stitchers on our Facebook group and discuss any tips or tricks with them. And that's it from us at Caterpillar Cross Stitch today. I hope you have a fantastic week and see you next Monday.